How are y'all? Kind of spread out a little bit. It's what is tonight? It's a Wednesday night. We've been doing sessions all day. You can already tell I've done 2 sessions today. I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to cough, and I apologize. I wish I could help it, but I will drink a lot of water and try to get around that. I really appreciate you being here. How many of y'all are using SAM right now? Okay, a good amount in the room. Okay, how many of y'all are checking it out? I want to see what it's all about. Great. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit for both of you. Hopefully you'll walk out with some ideas on how can I use SAM in the real world. A lot of times we talk about, SAM does this and SAM does that or whatever, but it's like, how do I apply that in real life? So we'll kind of jump and get started with that. First of all, let me tell you who I am. My name is Eric Johnson. I'm a principal developer. They pay me to speak here at AWS. I don't always earn it. Let me try it again. Principal developer advocate for serverless at AWS. Now, before I go any further, has anybody in here heard me speak before? Okay, all right, a good amount of the room, or you've seen me on streams or something like that. All right, well, for those of you who haven't, there are several rules when I'm talking, okay? So you got to pay attention. Now, rules is probably kind of a strong word, maybe guidelines, but these will help you when I'm speaking. So the very first rule is this is any number I want it to be. Okay? I'm going to hold this up at some point, and I'm going to say 7. I'm going to say 12. I'm going to tell you I have 5 kids, and so on. So it's contextual. You have to listen. I can do 1. I can get up to 4 if I take my shoes off, but that just gets weird for everybody. Okay? The second rule is these are quotes, not apostrophes. Okay? And I know that. This is easier than this. Okay? This is a bunny. So, and finally, these are thumbs. I do this a lot because this will get you beat up. Okay? So I'm just, playing it safe. I was born this way. I like to make a lot of jokes. I did not wake up for the first time like this today. If I did, we wouldn't be here. Or you might be, I would not. So I'd be somewhere else. But I am very comfortable with that. However, like I said, I'm going to make jokes and I'm comfortable. If that makes you uncomfortable, I'm also comfortable with that. So I'm going to be good either way. I'm going to have fun. So I do like to have a lot of fun. I love SAM. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit about who SAM is, but I get excited about SAM. A little more about me. I'm a brand new grandpa, about a year. I'm a drummer. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm very proud. I have 5 kids. I've given them all away. I'm just grandparenting now. So people ask me, do you have kids? Nope, just a grandchild. So I am a drummer. That used to say musician, but people are like, really? Turns out I was going to be a drummer for a living. Turns out I'm a really good drummer for one finger. But I'm fairly average after that. Nobody's going to pay me to play. So there you go. I'm a foodie. I love food, obviously. I do have a lot of opinions. Number 1 opinion, and let's just get this out here right now. There should never, ever, ever, ever be pineapple on pizza. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, some of you are leaving. Get on out. All right. All right. On Twitter, you can find me at EDJGeek. I espouse my pizza values on there quite a bit. I talk about Dr. Pepper, but I do also talk about serverless and lots of things coming, so feel free to follow me or block me, either way. All right, so we have a lot to talk about today. It's a big agenda. We're gonna do an intro to SAM, for those of you who've never seen it. We're going to talk about SAM Local, SAM Accelerate. We're going to look at what does code deployment look like. We're going to look at new or recent features. The development cycle, I kind of want to talk through. This is not real world. I want to talk through what does development look like using SAM, and finally some best practices. So let's jump in, and afterwards we can meet in the hall if we run out of time here, but I will answer questions. I'll talk your ear off about SAM. So let's jump in here. So quick intro to SAM. What is it even, right? You hear it all the time. SAM stands for the Serverless Application Model. Now, does anybody recognize the squirrel here? Okay, did anybody see the dance-off? some of my proudest moments. I have a squirrel costume. The guy from CDK has an otter costume, and every year we do a Dance Dance Revolution dance-off. I'm going to just say it right now. This year I won. That's right. So Sam is champion for the year, okay? Now, I did pass out shortly after, because this may shock you. I'm not a little guy. So, but anyway, yes, I was walking around here yesterday in a squirrel costume, some of my proudest moments. Literally have to tell my wife, really, they pay me to do this. So we have 2 squirrel costumes in our house in the closet. She's like, really? We need 2? So, Sam. This is Sam the squirrel, Sam serverless application model. Sam comes in 2 parts, right? There's the transform templates, and that's what we call the infrastructure as code. This is where you describe your infrastructure, right? You put the resources that you want. And something that a lot of folks don't know is you can use any CloudFormation resources in SAM. So SAM is built on top of CloudFormation. We'll get more into that in just a second. The second, and really what I consider the magic of SAM, is the SAM CLI. Okay, this is what differentiates it from some of the other infrastructure as code tools, because it's built specifically for serverless. It's built for serverless development, and we'll talk about why that or how that works. Like I said, it's built on top of CloudFormation, so you can use any normal CloudFormation resources, as well as the special resources that are serverless. We'll show you those in a second. So if you've never seen SAM, this is what it looks like. And you can see it's broken down. We have, if you've seen CloudFormation, this should look very similar. But really important on line 2, on line 2 is you have this transform. Okay, and so what happens is when you deploy a SAM template, CloudFormation will actually transform serverless resources to regular resources. So there's a lot of magic that, I shouldn't use magic, but there's a lot of logic that goes in behind that. So the first thing you've got in this, I'm declaring a Lambda Functions. This is really interesting. So here's the Lambda function, but also right in this resource, and the resources, I have this logical name of get products function, and I have a type. I'm saying this is a serverless function. And then I have these properties, but down below, you see this is where I'm going to handle my policies and my AWS IAM roles. And then I have my event declaration. Now, let's explain this for a second. Hopefully, if you're sitting in here, you've done some or interested in doing some serverless development, okay? So I'm going to give you a very, very technical explanation of serverless, okay? More to the point, it's probably going to be event-driven architecture. Now, if you have a notepad, you want to get this out. I'm going to go fast. Are you ready? So this is event-driven architecture and serverless. Something happens, and we react. Do you want me to do it again? All right, I'll do it again. Something happens, and we react. The reason I'm saying that, and that's kind of funny, we play around with that, but in a Lambda function, in order for a Lambda to be invoked, something has to happen. We have to have an event. It can be an API call. It can be a button push. Interesting enough, one of the first demos I did when I came to work for AWS is I had one of these IoT buttons. And I was showing how to use a Lambda. And when you have a Lambda button, you have a Lambda that supports the button. So you click it. So I wrote this really cool app that every time I clicked the button, it would tell my wife I love her. It would text her. I mean, come on, how cute is that, right? Thank you. Until I was actually demoing it live, and I would click it repeatedly. And in the event, she literally texted me in the event, said, please stop loving me. Our love will resume when you get home. That's an event. Something happens. Data dropped into a DynamoDB table, all kinds of ideas. So in SAM, I can declare an event right in the Lambda function. I can say, this is the Lambda function, and here's the event we're going to use. This particular example we're talking about is an API. So I'm going to say, I want API. This is a REST API. I'm going to use the properties. Here's the path, products, and the method, get. And that's all I need. And SAM is smart enough that it'll go out and create an API gateway endpoint that has the right IAM role and permissions to invoke this Lambda function. And now you have a public endpoint, right? So the next thing we have here is finally an Amazon DynamoDB table. And it's this simple. Now, there's more I can add to this, but this is what's called a simple table. This has an ID for the hash. There is no range on it, and it's just a simple table. So those, I believe that's 20 lines of code for those of you out there probably counting it. I know some, Grant, are you counting? So yeah, we've got some people in the room I know that probably counting to make sure, but that's 20 lines of code. What happens is that becomes a Lambda function, a DynamoDB table, Amazon API gateway, and the roles around it to produce that. Okay? Now, there's a lot more to SAM, and we can climb a lot more in this. And at the end of this session, I have a QR code that will take you to an hour-long explanation of the different serverless things and all that. So really follow that. I'd love to just talk about the SAM resources all the time, but we got to go a little further. Now, I will tell you that there are 8, like I said, SAM is built on top of CloudFormation, and it has 8 specific serverless resources. These are special resources that transform will change into normal resources. And the latest one we just added is the serverless connector, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So you have a function, you have a REST API, you have HTTP API, simple tables, which is DynamoDB table, layers, application, state machine, step functions, and a connector. Additionally, you have 16 event sources that you can use. So I can right there in this, now these aren't the only things that can invoke a Lambda, but these are the events that are supported in a Lambda function, right? So you can do an IoT rule, Amazon Kinesis, Amazon DynamoDB, through streams, HTTP API, scheduling, and more and more and more. These are handled, these are supported, and there might be more. I know we've added some, this may be 17 now. And then the last part of this, if you look in here, in fact, I'm going to go back to show it. Right here, we have this policies idea. In Lambda, like anything else, you want to build with the least privileges. You want your Lambda function to have the least amount of privileges. Now, this policy is what a Lambda is allowed to do, okay? There's 2 types of roles with Lambda. It's who's allowed to invoke the Lambda function, and then what is the Lambda function allowed to do. And that's how this policy is created. And in this, I have an already, we use these SAM policy templates, and there's one that's called DynamoDB read policy, and then I pass it the table name, and then SAM builds all the roles and stuff needed for that. So fun part about that is we have 75 plus of these pre-built policies that you can automatically add in. Now this is, in our best practice, we'll climb more into this, but this is the way you want to start with policies. This or connectors, okay? Don't write your own if you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel, all right? So with that, now we're going to climb into the AWS SAM CLI. Now, SAM CLI is broken into basically, and I kind of do this, and there's 2 different things. You have app development, which it has, and these are the commands, init, build, local, logs, traces, and sync. And you have stack management, validate, package, delete, deploy, pipeline, and publish. Now, we probably won't climb into all of these, but I want to explain some of these. Remember, we're going to talk about real-world development, when, how, why would I use these commands. Again, SAM, the CLI, is what gives you the power to develop serverless, locally and in the cloud. So the first thing we're going to talk about is SAM local. One of the questions I get a lot of time, excuse me one second, how do I test in serverless, right? Anybody wondering? How do I test serverless? How do I run my things? Okay, so how I approach it is I will do some unit tests, functional tests in SAM local. I think that's what it's really good for. And here's how that's going to work. SAM local has several commands to make life easy for you. The first is SAM local start API. If I run SAM local start API, it's actually going to, and you have to have an API declared or an event with an API declared in your template, it's going to start that API and emulate API gateway. Not authorization or authentication or anything like that, just simply a REST endpoint that you can test your function. So you can call that. This is great if you need to bring it up locally and test your client against it. So your client will just point at the local host and you can test against it. And as you change the function, you can reload that and test again. Okay, so this is SAM local start API. The next command it has is called SAM local invoke. SAM local invoke, and you can pass some flag names on which function. If there's only one, it'll know to do that one. It will actually invoke the Lambda function as if the Lambda service were invoking it. So you get that local, and we use containers for that. So you Docker, or there's some other things we support to run. So you actually will run, and you can test different ideas. Now, the thing about this is I'm showing here in this example, I can test with S3, step functions, Lex, Cognito, things like that. But one of the things I get a lot of people asking me is, I don't know what that event looks like. If I want to mock an event to test local, I can actually pass an event into SAM local. If I want to mock an event, what does that look like? Well, we've got you covered there. We also have this thing called SAM local generate event. And so if I say SAM local generate event, and I've got an example here, generate event batch get job, this is what a get job looks like. This is the event that batch will kick out when I do a get job. So I can take that and I can pass it in on my command line to my function, and now I have a mocked local service that I can test. And then the last one we use here is called start Lambda. So AWS SAM local start Lambda, this actually runs a Lambda service locally. This is different than an API gateway. So this is as if you had the Lambda service itself. And so this is good for testing calls from a CLI or an SDK. And you can point at this endpoint and you can test it. And I show an example here, AWS Lambda Invoke, and I pass some things. And you use it, again, you use this to test from CLI or SDK. It's a great way to, you can pass in an event. So this is about as much local testing as I would encourage you to do. I have a lot of folks that come and go, yeah, I'm running all these emulators locally. And the first question I ask them is, how much time did you spend getting your emulator working? I'm not against emulators, okay? I think there's some great ones out there, but I would rather test against the cloud whenever I can. I am not smart enough to get Docker network working. There it is. Okay, that's open. I would rather that not leave the room, but my wife already knows this, so there you go. So, the next thing I'm going to show you is what we call SAM Local Accelerate. One of the things we say is when you're testing, you should get to the cloud as fast as possible. Right? Because remember, when I said when we're using SAM Local, we're not worried about authenticate. It's using your local credentials, which most likely is admin. Right? Because whenever we create our user and we install our credentials, we use admin locally because we have access to everything, right? So that's not a good test of your system. You need to test with real credentials. So let's move on to SAM Accelerate. We came around with this last year, and SAM Accelerate has 3 components that we kind of put together. SAM Accelerate is just kind of a general name we called them. The first is excuse me, we made modifications to SAM build. Right? We brought out parallel builds, incremental builds, and temporary layers. The second is we created a feature called SAM Sync, which updates your code without deploying, and also with a watch. And then finally, we did SAM Logs, which does aggregate logs, and you can do filtering, and you can include traces in that. So let's look at how this works. All right, so we have this idea. We've got 2 Lambda functions that we're going to run. And how we do this is I'm going to do a build. So I'm just going to say SAM build. And here's what it's going to do. First of all, it's going to take your dependencies, and it depends on the runtime. Okay, some runtimes we do, most we do, some we don't, and there's reasons for that, and I'll explain it in a little bit. But what we do is your dependencies, we compile them all, and we take your code, and we compile that all, and then we cache it. All right, so we cache that each individually, and then we prepare artifacts to be deployed, Lambda 1 and Lambda 2. So the next thing you can do is, what's kind of fun here is if I run SAM build again, and I've only changed Lambda 1, then it's only going to update Lambda 1. All right, and this, you're like, well, with 2 Lambdas, why is that a big deal? Most people aren't using just 2 Lambda functions, right? They may have 30 Lambda functions. And they want to, we don't want to rebuild those every time we just change one. So we have this mechanism to just use from cache when we have that. We also have parallel. So you pass these flags. I'm showing these flags down in the corner where you can say cache. So we do cache there. And so you have to opt into that. And then parallel, meaning build all of them at the same time. Don't build one, then the next, then the next. Okay? And then finally, use container. Use container is very helpful. Let's say I need to build something for Python 3.8, but I only have 3.9 on my system. If I just add -- use container, SAM will actually grab a container and build inside of that and create them. So you don't have to have a local environment set up. So that's very helpful. All right. So the next command we have is SAM sync. So with SAM sync, the sync command automatically calls AWS SAM build for you. That's something to note. So when I do SAM sync, the first time I run SAM sync, it's going to actually build all of my artifacts again, and then it's going to deploy the infrastructure and make sure everything's in place. Okay? But the fun thing is here, you see how I've got this temporary Lambda layout? Okay? So this temporary, layer. You didn't ask for a layer, but we're going to create a layer temporarily. A layer is something that we can separate from the Lambda function and put up out in public, or not in public, but up in your account, and refer to that for your dependencies. So we don't have to push your dependencies every time. If you change a dependency, we'll update the layer. So you see what I'm driving at is we get very granular on how we build that out. And you're able to say, just change these things. Okay? So when we go through SAM sync, then what happens is we build all those. We say, okay, what do we need to build? Do we need to do the code? Do we need to do the layers? And then it pushes it all out to AWS Lambda, but it talks directly to Lambda. There's no CloudFormation deploy. So you're looking at the time to build and the time to deploy. I'm not going to try to guess time to build based on what you have, but your deployment time is just a few seconds. So now what happens is you deploy, you test in the cloud. But we took it a step further, and this is kind of cool. We also said if you're using a step function, then what we'll do is on this, you can take, and step function, if it's declared in ASL, which is the language you use, Amazon Step language, or Amazon States language, then, and an open API to declare your API gateway, then we can also push those updates as well without having to do a redeployment. But SAM's smart enough to know, hey, if you need to do a redeployment, we can do that. If there's an architectural change, we can do that, but we'll just push your code. So in real-world development, this allows you to immediately sync your code up to the cloud and test. And what I'll do is I'll literally have SAM watch sitting here, and I'll code, save, updates, test. And I may run some automation against it if I want to, end-to-end type things. So the third part of that for development is the AWS SAM logs. So SAM logs, this is one of the most underutilized. I love this feature. I use it constantly. People don't realize it. SAM logs have been around for a while, but we've done a lot to aggregate. You can say SAM logs, you point it at a stack, and it'll take every log that's output from that stack from API gateway, step functions, and Lambda functions, and it'll aggregate them all into one window. And you can add the -- watch, and they'll update every few seconds. So how many of y'all have ever been trying to debug a distributed? You know where I'm going. You distributed, and sometimes we get so frustrated, we just put the, print, I have been invoked. Just to know, did I hit, is that function even firing? And then we see it in our console and going, yes! Right? So you get to debug this asynchronous stuff by loading those into the console. Additionally, what I'll show you here, you can add traces to that, or you can grab just traces as well. So X-rays involved in that. So those are three things that SAM Accelerate brings that help you develop much faster and become a very, like I said, a very applicable real-world approach to development. So the next question I get asked a lot is, how do I deploy my code? And there's multiple ways to deploy code. And it's the standard answer in any IT. It's like, well, it depends, right? We always say it depends. So the first way you could deploy is, there's my button working, AWS SAM sync. But you don't want to do that. Okay, SAM sync is not designed for production deployments. SAM sync is designed to sync your infrastructure in a test account. All right, so let's just stop right there, okay? Because we're doing some things in the background that you may not want with those temporary layers and things like that. All right, so let's not do that. The next one is we actually have a command called SAM deploy. Now, what I tell folks is SAM deploy should be used in all your development environments. Each of your developers should have their own environment. This is serverless. Serverless is pay as you for what you use. So it doesn't matter if you're in account A or account B or account C, right? In fact, if you game it well enough, you get free tier across multiple accounts, okay? So developers should have their own account, and then they can use SAM deploy to push as much as they want. You just share a SAM template from a GitHub repo. That's the whole nature of infrastructure as code. So here's how this works. With SAM deploy, when we deploy it, depending on the type of Lambda function you're using, whether it's zip or container, the first thing we do is so you'll have already run SAM build. SAM deploy won't run build on its own. So you run SAM build, and then the artifacts are uploaded to an S3 bucket or an ECR repository, which SAM will have already created for you. Okay. The second thing we'll do is AWS SAM uploads the artifacts to the bucket or repository. I already said that here. It moves over, and it creates, apparently I have a copy edit issue. It's the same command there. All right. So number 2 is not SAM uploads again, okay? So number 2 is it creates a CloudFormation change set, right? So that change set, if you've ever seen that, it says, hey, here's your current CloudFormation, and here's what we're going to change. Let me list out the changes, okay? And finally, the change set is deployed. So it's a standard CloudFormation deployment, but we use that through SAM deploy. And this is great for your developers so they can do this as needed. But here's the issue. A lot of times when we talk about deployment, when we get into environments like our staging and production, that's not where we want to use this. Okay, we want to look at using a CI/CD. We want to look at using automation. Before I came to AWS, I was a solutions architect for a partner company. And my job, I would sit down with companies and I would talk about operations. I would talk about all kinds of stuff, migrations. And it was always funny. I would say, well, what does your automation for deployment look like? Oh, yeah, we're fully automated. Okay, that's great. What does that look like? Well, it's automated. We're fully automated. Okay, tell me about it. Well, Bob saves the artifacts on his desk. And then Jan, here's the deal. If you have people's names in your pipeline, you're not automated. Right? And you're tightly coupled. So when you're building environments out, you want them to be automated. And we've run some tools to help you do that. So the next one we have is a thing called AWS SAM pipelines. If you're not familiar with this was released last year. It's incredibly helpful. We have folks that struggle with how do I set up integrations with GitLab, GitHub, things like that, GitHub Actions. This does it for you, right? You can do the code suite, so obviously code deploy, code commit, things like that. You can use GitHub Actions, Jenkins, and GitLab. And how this works is there's 2 commands. The first one is SAM Pipeline Bootstrap. And this is going to create all those roles and stuff that you need and the permissions, and it can do it across. So you see, I've got 2 environments here. I'm going to have my staging role, and then I'm going to allow, in production, I'm going to allow that staging to come over and deploy there, right? So it sets that up, okay? And it'll set it up, that's all the AWS resources. So the next one we have is the SAM Pipeline Init. And what you'll do is you'll do this for each, you can do this for each stage or how you set it up. And this actually generates a pipeline configuration for whatever service you're using, right? Including AWS access keys or AWS secret access keys. You can have it connect to Jenkins. Basically, it creates a configuration file. And then when you commit it, I did this with GitHub the other day, GitHub Actions. I set all this up, and then when I committed it to GitHub, boom, my action was live and running. It was the coolest thing ever. So this takes a lot of the guesswork out of deployment. That's the question I get is, how do we do that, right? So when it's all said and done, then it looks like this, right? So you commit to GitHub, Jenkins, whatever, and then it's going to go over to staging, and when we like that, then we can continue on to production. So you have these steps that you can take. All right, so that's how. So now, let's jump into some newer recent features to help you. We're not going to go through a lot of these, but just so you know. First thing is, that one I just talked about, currently, or before we made this change, you had to actually create an AWS IAM role. You had to create a user for your folks to use. We've now changed that. You can use an OIDC authorizer, which is very common with GitHub. So you can say, I'm going to use an OIDC authorizer. Now that is my user. And he has rights, she has rights, it has rights to deploy to staging and then production. The next thing we added is nested stack support. This is huge. When we talk about real-world applications, you do not want 700 lines of code in your infrastructure as code. You don't want your templates going on and on and on. It's smart to break them down into logical steps, but beforehand, you couldn't use SAM Accelerate with that. Now you can use, with nested stacks, you can use SAM Accelerate. Next thing is ES Build. Remember earlier I said we do these custom layers and build those out? ES Build, we don't. The reason is when you run ES Build and you do that tree shaking, it makes the deliverable so small that we didn't need to. So if you're using Node or TypeScript, I heavily encourage you to look at using this. It does a lot of tree shaking for you, and the ES Build's built right in there. The next one I'm super excited about. Does anybody use Terraform in the room? Okay, some folks. Well, there you go. We are now supporting Terraform in the SAM CLI. Not entirely. I'm going to be just straight up honest with you. But if you want to run SAM local, you can run start API and you can run, I've got it, SAM local invoke, and start Lambda. Those are the two commands, and they'll read. There's some configuration. There's a blog that's in the resource doc I've got. There's a configuration you have to set up. But if you're using Terraform, which we know a lot of enterprises are, this allows you to locally test Lambda functions. This is a big deal. I'm pretty excited about this. All right. The next one is our SAM connectors. SAM connectors, how many of y'all struggle with IAM? Okay, the rest of you are liars. Okay, I do. I'm a principal at AWS, and I can't even spell IAM. It is hard. And security is hard anyway, but one of the things we found is folks really struggle setting up IAM, getting that to work correctly. So one of the things we did is we said, what if we could help them by creating a connector? So this is what this looks like. So you have a source. Let's say I've got a function, right? And I needed to be able to talk to a destination, which is a table. So I'm going to create a third resource in the middle called my table connector. And all I have to do is say the source is the function, the destination is the table, and the permissions I want are write and read. Done. And it goes through and creates the roles, and you can do just write, you can do just read, and it creates the roles that you need. Now, it can be a little looser than you may be looking for from a least privilege, so you can look at, you can see the roles that it outputs, but it's going to hold that to either read or write. And so it's a very easy way to get to know IAM as well. So I really encourage you to take a look at this. This gives you an idea of what a read permissions looks like for DynamoDB. And then here's a write permissions. Okay? So this is in preview right now. We love your feedback. Please tell us, hey, this and that. And we're going to do a lot more with this. But we feel that this will be very helpful for folks. All right, so let's get real. Let's kind of climb into, I'm going to tell you how I approach development. This is kind of that real-world development. And this is the Eric Johnson method of using SAM. And so I'm going to talk to you through a couple of ways I approach things. First of all, let's look at the development cycle and where SAM is involved with that. So in SAM, we have this development cycle. You're going to have create. Okay, first of all, we're going to start out, we're going to create an application, so I'm going to use SAM Init. There's lots of options I can do to that, SAM Init. The next thing I'm going to do local testing. And we talked through SAM local, and I'm going to use SAM build, and I'm going to use SAM delete. Those are the commands that I would use there, and then I'll use invoke start API, and so on. Then I'm going to do remote testing. And this is where I want to get to as fast as I can. I've talked you through how I use SAM Accelerate to sync up. I do that right away. Then we're going to use, and I'll do that in my own development account. Then we're going to use the pipelines and the logs and traces. Now, this is an interesting thing. So we do pipelines to set up staging and production. But remember, I was saying logs, I could read something. If I hear someone tells me, hey, something weird is happening in production, I can do SAM logs against the stack name in production and just monitor what's going on. SAM logs is super powerful. Okay, so this is how I kind of approach that. We're going to continue on this. So here's some best practices on that. So the first thing I do is I often start with a pattern. Okay, this is not a shameless plug. This is real honest goodness where you should start. Okay, we have a thing on serverless land called patterns. And in this patterns, if you haven't seen it, we have a ton. It's going to be linked. When you go to the link at the end, it'll take you there. 186, I think, is updated because we just added a couple yesterday. These are patterns say, hey, I don't know how to connect a Lambda with CloudWatch, or I don't know how to do API gateway to a Lambda or something. I don't know how to do batch and step functions. These are open source and people push these. We allow other people to push them. We kind of monitor them. Our team does. And there are all these patterns out there. There's also snippets, little code snippets, and there's also workflows, examples. There, you can filter by language, service, and there's a ton of them. So start with that. If you're trying to figure out how to do that, start with that. My clicker's not working. Hang on a second here. Yep, it is working. Oh, got it. Okay. So it looked like the same slide to me. I was like, that doesn't make sense. All right. So in each pattern, we show you the SAM template. We have a link to the repository so you can grab it. You can deploy from it, and there's cleanup instructions. Okay, always watch for cleanup instructions. All right. And then you have additional resources and why this pattern was created. The second thing when I'm building real world is I make heavy, heavy use of the Tomo file. Does anybody know what the Tomo file is in SAM? Okay, a couple of you. So in SAM, we use a samconfig.toml file. Why we use toml, I could not imagine. But it's Tom's other markup language is what that stands for. Thank you, Tom. All right? But what it does is it looks kind of like this. And it allows you to set some defaults. Remember I was saying, hey, you should use cached when you're building. You should use parallel when you're building, but you have to opt in. In the file, you can go in and say, anytime I'm in the default profile, you can do different profiles. Anytime I'm in the default profile and I'm running this command, I want you to add parallel or cache to it. And so you set a lot of defaults. I have one that's just kind of my default. I copy and paste it in when I'm doing it. Okay, so this is just a tip on how to get these up and running. I set those priorities. You can set which profile you want to deploy to. Okay, before I came to AWS, I did a lot of consultancy work with serverless things like that. And Eric Johnson has been known to deploy an application to the wrong customer's account. It happens. Okay, so what I do is I set my profiles in there. I say, hey, when you're deploying to this, use this profile. Use this profile so that I don't do that. I probably still will, but, I wish I was smarter, but I'm not, okay? So it helps you differentiate between environments. If you pass a flag, you can set a default. You can override it with flags, okay? But the idea is if you pass a flag on the command line, it can be set as a default in the Tomo file. There's a blog about this on the resource page I'm going to give you where I show a whole example on why I would use these. Back to IAM, we talked about AWS SAM connectors, also the SAM policy templates. Please, this is worth saying again, please, 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 do not write your own policies until you have to. Okay? Use these existing ones. They've got the least privileges built in, and it's critical. It's not critical. Least privilege is important. Okay? So I would encourage you to look at the SAM policy templates. I've got those linked on the resource page, and the same connectors, whichever you want to go with, you can do both. Here's an interesting one. When I'm building, I never, ever name my resources. Okay? I'll tell you why. Now, I said earlier, hey, each developer should have his own account. But as many applications as I've built and I'm working through, and I'm working in my same demo account, How many times do I say get account function? That's my logical name, right? And I hard code that. If I hard code that name into the function, I'm going to have function naming collision eventually. I can only have one function with the same name, right? So CloudFormation will name your resources for you. You don't, most probably you're not going to care what they're named, okay? Because we dynamically pass that around inside the template. So instead of saying, I'm going to name this function this, then hard coding that whenever I need a reference to it, I just use the CloudFormation intrinsic functions to say, refer to this, right? So this is a really, it's a better way to not have collisions. When I first started doing this, there was like 19 developers. We were all in the same account, and we were just killing each other. So then every function I had was named, you know, Eric-222, whatever, and it became a nightmare. So you really want to let CloudFormation do the work on that. All right. One of the questions I get a lot is, how do I build step functions? How do I work with step functions in SAM? Here's my approach to it. I've explained this to a couple people just sitting around. It's like, whoa. So what I do, I'm a big, huge believer. Has anybody built step functions in here? Okay, a lot of you. Have you worked with the Workflow Studio? Oh, okay. Some of you aren't raising your hands. Man, when you go out of here, don't even leave. Just sit and open the Workflow Studio. It's so cool. It's literally a drag and drop, okay? Sitting in the room is a gentleman raise your hand, Grant. Right here, he's our expert. He's a good guy. I just made everybody go talk to him. But Workflow Studio, yes? Huge. And it allows you to drag and drop, and it builds the ASL file for you. Problem is, you need that in your SAM template to be able to say to your fellow developers, here's the template. Here's what you use. You can't plug. So how I do it is I create a bare minimum state machine in an external file. And this is an example of it. It's just a pass, right? So I say it's a minimal state machine with a pass. Then I refer to that inside the template.yaml. So I call it. And then I also build any other resources. I add all the policies that I'm going to need. I know I'm going to read to DynamoDB, and I'm going to write to DynamoDB. And I know I'm going to have some destinations, the CloudWatch, things like that. And then I'll build other resources like a Lambda function, things like that. Then what I do is I do a SAM sync, which deploys all that out there. Then I go over to the Workflow Studio, and this is the Workflow Studio you're looking at. And I'm happy as a clam. I'm dragging and dropping, and I know that I've already got the function I need. If I didn't, I go back to SAM and I add it, and SAM's going to automatically sync that up for me. I drag that in. I get it all where I want. This is an actual step workflow function that we use on our team. This helps manage new features, things like that. And so then when I'm done, I take and I grab the ASL file from the Workflow Studio, and I paste it back into my SAM. And then SAM syncs that up, and I'm golden. So I get to use SAM, and I get to use the Workflow Studio to manage these. Okay, and this is kind of a sticking point for folks. Like, oh, I want to use that, but I want to be in SAM. This is a good way to do that. All right, next, best practice on this. Always use SAM delete for cleanup. Let me tell you a story about SAM delete. SAM delete did not exist till last year. I've been begging for SAM delete. Everybody's like, nah, we don't need it. We don't need it. It's just AWS CloudFormation delete. It'll take it down. But then we started adding some stuff, like we were managing the buckets. We were managing the repos. So what SAM delete does is, because we create artifacts for you, we create a repository if you're using containers, SAM delete will go out and clean all that up. Okay? So if you just delete a stack, you may not get all that. So when you're clearing out a SAM application within the project, you can just say SAM delete, and it should pick it up from your Tomo file. If not, you can say SAM delete -- stack name, and then the stack name, and it'll go out and delete everything tied to that. This is a good way to clean up your applications. All right. So I promise you some more resources. I do an hour deep dive intensive, what every resource does, what everything in SAM does, how to use CLI on this. I also have I did 2 seasons of a show called Sessions with SAM. And I literally do a half hour every week where I would do some kind of SAM implementation, showing you through all the templates. I love SAM. I've said it over and over. And so if you really want to climb into SAM and get accelerated on your serverless development, that's another good one. There's a lot of those resources are on here. Serverlessland.com. Anybody heard of this? Okay, a couple of you. Our team maintains this. We build this website, and it aggregates all kinds of stuff from all around this. A lot of it's ours, a lot of it's other folks. But we maintain this. Serverlessland.com has learning paths that you can take. It has videos you can watch, blogs you can read. It has workshops you can do. Anybody been to Serverless Espresso yet? Gotten coffee? You can build your own Serverless Espresso in a workshop on here. It shows you how to do it. If you want to continue your SAM learning, or your AWS SAM learning, we have the serverless learning path here. With that, I want to thank you. Please fill out the form or survey. Have a great reInvent. Thank you.